Our next speaker is someone who's been at the forefront of longevity research for decades. Dr. Brian Kennedy is professor of biochemistry and physiology at the National University of Singapore and one of the world's leading voices in geroscience. His work explores how the biology of aging can be understood and translated into interventions that help people live longer, healthier lives. He'll be sharing lessons from Singapore, a nation that's become a true hub for healthy aging. In his talk titled Global Science, Local Impact, Singapore as a Center of Longevity Innovation. Please welcome Dr. Brian Kennedy.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's great to see everyone here. I have to say that I love following Mahmood because he provides such a wonderful introduction to aging and global demographic changes that are happening. What I don't like about following him is he's such a good speaker that there's no way I can live up to that, but I'm gonna do my best today. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what's going on around the globe, focusing somewhat on Singapore, but trying to talk more broadly than that. But first I wanna give you a little bit of the history of longevity research. How did we get to where we are today? And it came from innovative funding sources. And the first one of those, first let me tell you about the history of longevity research, and I'll get to the funding sources. So this question really started in the 1800s. In 1825, there was an accountant for an insurance company named Gompertz who wrote the first mathematical equations to explain human mortality. And that Gompertz equation is still considered today by physicists and others who are trying to understand how we age. The first intervention that I know of that extended lifespan was calorie restriction, and that was in 1935. In the 50s, evolutionary theories of aging really rose to the forefront, and some of those theories are still followed largely today. The first genetic mutations to extend lifespan were really in the 70s and 80s, and the genes were cloned in the 90s and 2000s. And also in the 2000s, we had conserved pathways of longevity, remarkably across a wide evolutionary spectrum, from yeast cells all the way to humans. There are certain genes and pathways that modify the longevity process, like mTOR and sirtuins and others. And now, starting in around 2013, we've had aging clocks, biomarkers to measure how fast you're biologically aging. And I'm going to talk about those tomorrow. And then later that year, there were first papers came out on hallmarks and pillars of aging, and I'll touch upon that later. Much of this later stuff came about by innovative funding in the United States through the National Institute of Aging. And you can see here, this program started in 1975. And was doing a substantial amount of research funding throughout, all the way till today. Although I would also reiterate that US funding is under threat, as it is in many parts of the world right now, and we have to keep funding geroscience. And so a lot of the discoveries came in the United States because the National Institute of Aging was funding the research there. But they also came through philanthropic support. And these are just some of the philanthropic organizations that support aging research through grants and other mechanisms. The American Federation for Aging Research, I want to highlight. They've done a lot of work. You can read a lot of the other ones. I do want to point out Hevolution because it really is an amazing funding source for scientists doing geroscience right now. And it's really opened the doors globally for research to expand. Much of this research that has been funded up until the last few years was preclinical in nature, yeast and worms and flies. And so I want to take you through just 2 slides of the preclinical data, and then we'll get into the human story. So a lot of the major discoveries were driven by very simple model organisms. Yeast and worms and flies live only 2 weeks, and so you can do a lot of experiments very quickly. It's cheap to work on these organisms. And then you could follow that up by studying rodents, mostly mice and rats. There was a lot of work in cell culture to identify pathways linked to cell senescence and DNA damage and other things. There are longitudinal human studies that discovered genes linked to human aging, a lot of evolutionary biology, and a heavy focus on diseases of aging. If we look at what's happening now, there's a major transition in preclinical research, and I want to emphasize this because we still need to keep funding this research. Some of the biggest questions on aging are not answered yet. Why do we age? We still don't really know the answer to that question. Is it possible to slow or really even stop aging? I think everyone agrees we can slow aging now, at least it's possible. But stopping aging, is it possible? We don't know. And a lot of these preclinical models can really address these questions. So we're seeing a decline in these non-vertebrate models, and that's unfortunate because the simple organisms still have a lot to tell us. The cell culture work is now going to stem cell culture work. The human data that's available is making AI come to the forefront. And there are better designs now for rodent studies of aging that more mimic the human condition. And then also I think it's very important that we think about things like dogs and primates as research tools for aging. And by dogs especially, I mean companion animals, not dogs in laboratories. And you may hear a little bit more about that from Matt tomorrow. So I'm just going to leave you with 2 take-homes from all of this research and then move on. One, and this is a slide that Matt Kaberlein and I think it's the 20th anniversary of using this slide, some version thereof, the idea of going from sick care to health care. We have all of these diseases and we treat them still mostly like they're in silos. We train doctors to specialize in these areas. We do research in these areas. And what we've known for a long time now is that aging is the biggest risk factor for all of these chronic conditions and many others that I'm not listing on this slide. So why are we not focusing more on aging research? Why are we not targeting the factor that's driving all of these conditions that we don't want to get when we get older? The other is that we know a lot of pathways that modulate aging, hallmarks and pillars. I'm not going to go through these today. I think one point I want to make, and you can see that under the pillars on the right, is that these pathways are really interconnected to each other. It's not like 10 different things are going wrong independently to cause aging. You have a homeostatic process that's keeping you healthy, and as that network breaks down, then you start to get chronic diseases. So it's these pillars and hallmarks are all connected to each other. And I think what we're really looking at here is systems biology. Okay, enough preclinical models. It's time to get human. So what are we really doing? Well, I can tell you in our lab and many others now, we're focused on 2 things, interventions and biomarkers. Now, interventions need to be thought about broadly. It's not just drugs. The environment has a big impact on how people age. If people live near green spaces in urban environments, they're biologically younger. Lifestyle, I'm not going to talk in detail about this. Sleep, stress, diet, exercise, social connectivity, all of these things impact aging, and they need to be a focus for any sort of regulatory approach, government-based approach. We work a lot on supplements and drugs. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. And there are many other kinds of interventions. And before I just touch on those, I want to mention that the biomarker side is equally critical. If we can't measure how fast people are aging, then we can't test whether the interventions are actually working to slow aging or not. And tomorrow morning, if you're not sick of me already, I'm going to talk about biomarkers of aging, so I'll come back to that later. Now, there are many other kinds of interventions out there, not just, I mentioned supplements and repurposed drugs, but now there are longevity clinics doing all kinds of different things. There are medical devices, hyperbaric chambers, cryotherapy, a number of other things that are happening. You can go and get stem cells and exosomes now. You can go to get gene therapy to slow aging now in certain clinics around the world. I personally don't think we're ready for that to be prime time yet, but it just illustrates the fact that there's so much interest in people slowing aging. And we have to rapidly get an understanding of which of these interventions are safe and which of these interventions are efficacious. And meanwhile, the longevity industry has grown dramatically. I would say longevity is the biggest growth in the biomedical sector. But not just biotech companies and supplement companies. There are a lot of diagnostic companies that measure aging now. Med tech is growing. Longevity clinics I'll come back to later, but they're starting all over Earth, basically. I can't keep up with all of them. And even consumer companies are focusing heavily now on what do we do, how do we incorporate an aging population, how do we incorporate healthy longevity into our commercial strategies. And if you look at total financing, and I stole this, it's a different color for this slide because I stole it from Phil Newman at Longevity Technology. You can see that the funding in the biomedical sector is going up. So we're up to $8.2 billion funding in 2024. And so this is a dramatic improvement in the amount of money that's going into research and longevity. But I have to point out that I don't want to overplay this. If you look at that compared to funding for other things that are important in the world right now, you can see that aging in that red line at the bottom is a blip on the screen. And so funding for oncology in blue is 5 or 6 times higher than aging. Now, I think if aliens came down to Earth and you told them that 30% of the population gets cancer and 100% gets aging, and we're funding cancer at 5 times more than we're funding aging, they might say, well, no signs of intelligent life, we can leave right now. We need to rethink about how we're funding biomedical science. And that's not, I'm perfectly happy. I want cancer to be cured. I'm not against funding cancer, but we have to bring up longevity research a lot. So there are a lot of exciting companies coming on the board. Because Martin O'Day is here and because I helped this company, I just listed one, which is called Alice. They work on biomarker, a clinical approach to helping people with longevity and measuring the biologic aging process, and I'll touch on that tomorrow. Let me go back to the demographics and talk about it in my way. Sorry, when I uploaded the slides, the green circles got moved slightly. But what you can see globally is that life expectancy at birth in 2019 was, before the pandemic, was 73, and healthy life expectancy was 63. So there's a 10-year gap when you're losing health, but you're still alive, the sick span. And so when we think about how we modify aging, we want to really make sure that we don't expand that sick span. And I would argue that what medical treatments are doing right now, we wait till you get sick and then we treat you for these chronic diseases. We don't often completely cure these diseases. And so we keep people alive longer, which is a good thing, but it's also expanding that sick span and it's driving healthcare costs. If we can make that window of time go down or at least go proportional to extending health span, it's an economic victory instead of an economic loss. So why am I talking about Singapore? Well, this is a recent measurement of healthy living years and life expectancy in Singapore. And this review ranks Singapore. You could argue about Singapore, Japan, or even a couple other of these countries, but this one listed Singapore first with a life expectancy of about 83.7 and a healthy life expectancy of 73.6. One thing you'll notice, by the way, is that gap, that years in ill health is almost the same everywhere in the world. And so that's something to think about as we go forward. So Singapore, by Dan Buettner, got identified as the 6th blue zone. All of the other blue zones are natural areas on Earth where people live a long time. There's one in Japan, there's a couple in Europe, there's one in North America and Central America. Singapore got identified as the first manufactured blue zone, meaning that the way the government has organized the society and the environment and how living basically in Singapore has led to a very long, healthy life expectancy. And this has been reported by the BBC and many other news organizations. I actually have no idea why the BBC decided that eating a lot of carbohydrates and noodles is a good way to live a long time, but they did report on this, and it's given Singapore a lot of press regarding healthy longevity. Now, if you look at the approaches up until recently in Singapore, they've been really organized around managing the aging process. And so you can see on the left here sort of a diagrammatic view. We need to get older people exercising. We need to get them on bicycles. We need to get better community-based and hospital care and build more hospitals. And then you can see the version in the Lancet here that's too hard to read and it doesn't really matter that much. But disease prevention is only one small sector of that. So the first thing Singapore really went after was not slowing aging. It was about how do we set up a culture and an environment and a healthcare system that's conducive to living a long time. And Singapore has a lot of the problems you heard about already. By 2030, there's only 2 workers for every retired person. 30% of the population is going to be over 65. And there's just no economic solution to solve this unless we keep people healthy longer. And this kind of data, which is global, not just Singapore, has led me and others to argue that aging is the biggest challenge of the 21st century. It's not COVID. Everybody thought about COVID, but it was really, who died from COVID? It was really people over the age of 65, for the most part, that succumbed to COVID because they lost resilience. And so we need to do something about slowing aging in the current demographic situation really on Earth. There's 2 billion people over 65 in 2050. And a lot of people think this field is about billionaires, but it's really about billions. It's about those 2 billion people that we need to think about. But the new plan for Singapore, which is not officially out yet, so I asked Google, I know I'm involved in it, but I can't talk much about it, but Google AI mode could compile all the statements made by Singapore government officials about where this is going. And you can see that the focus is changing. Longevity is being identified as a key national priority for RIE 2030, which is the Research, Innovation, and Enterprise program. The goal is to improve the quality of life by delaying biologic aging and preventing age-related diseases to extend health span. So I'm very encouraged by this. I think it reflects a forward-thinking, innovative approach, and it's one of the first ones that I've seen written in this way from a government that's really trying to tackle the aging challenge in their population. If we come to the National University of Singapore and what we've been doing, we've started a number of programs now that really focus on trying to understand aging. The Healthy Longevity Translational Research Program was started in 2020. We have 40 faculty now working on basic biology of aging, translational approaches to aging, and age-related diseases. We also have a Center of Healthy Longevity, which is much more clinically focused, testing interventions in humans in clinical trials to see which ones slow the aging process. And we've also joined the Life Sciences Institute in 2024, which helps us expand the program even more. There are a number of affiliated programs also. There's a reproductive longevity and equality program that was started that the intent of is to understand ovarian aging and to improve and extend the period of fertility, but also to mitigate some of the challenges that happen after menopause in the female population. There's an Academy of Healthy Longevity by Andrea Meyer, which does research, but it also has a number of educational programs that are designed to train the clinicians and the scientists and even the executives in terms of what healthy longevity looks like and how to implement it in their context. So that's one way we're trying to tackle the problem of not having enough people skilled in understanding longevity. There's a Memory and Aging Center, a Sleep and Cognition Center, and a number of others that are associated with the program as well. So this is becoming quite large. The preclinical research is really trying to address the links between aging and chronic disease, use translational approaches to develop new drugs and interventions, and measure biologic aging in the Singapore population, and also to look at epidemiology. Singapore has many of the same ethnicities that throughout Southeast Asia, including Mauritius, including a substantial Indian population in Singapore, as well as Chinese and Malay. So it's a very diverse environment, and it's made up of ethnicities that are understudied with regard to aging. On the translational side, it's really about developing and testing small molecule interventions, adapting healthy lifestyle interventions to Singapore, and also getting personalized. We need to understand which interventions work best in which people and what the downstream effects of that are. So personalization, precision, these are key words as we develop healthy longevity. And so this is something that the Dean, Chong Yap Singh, and I have been working on. And it's really what is needed as we move forward in Singapore. We need biologic aging clocks that are adapted not only to Singapore populations, but to individuals. We need to know which aspects of health we're measuring, and we have to have a validity. We have to be able to be predictive and responsive for interventions. And so what we've started doing is something like what happened at the National Institute of Aging, where they did an intervention testing program in mice. We're developing a rapid clinical trials program in humans where we can go through different drugs and supplements and other interventions that may slow the human aging process and measure and validate those as quickly as possible. We also have a big challenge. These clinics are starting all over the world, and I'm generally supportive of longevity clinics, but they're doing all kinds of different things. Sometimes, in my opinion, it extends beyond the realm of safety. And so Singapore is a very regulated environment. It's hard to set up a longevity clinic there. And so the approach we're trying to take is to set up a different kind of ethics approval process that's more tolerant of interventions that don't have strong efficacy but still have safety, to allow clinics to come into a respected environment like Singapore, set up and develop this industry in the island. But there's a challenge to that. The backside of the story is they're going to have to share data with the government so that the government can independently evaluate safety and look at large data to see how to help these clinics move their support from small groups of people coming into the clinic into the entire population. So this strategy is being developed right now, and hopefully we can implement it so that we can set up a controlled environment where clinics can come in, try different interventions, and see what works in a safe way. And this kind of thing is already happening in other places. For instance, the Bahamas has a strategy to do this. And so it's more based on regenerative medicine, but there's an advisory board now for a global advisory board that looks at clinics that want to come into the Bahamas, evaluates the interventions they're doing, and determines whether they're safe and can be moved forward. So a number of countries are now trying to do this. And I think that might be an interesting way to build an industry in a place like Mauritius, where people want to have healthy longevity. There aren't a lot of clinics yet. And by establishing a smart, forward, innovative thinking regulatory process, it may be possible to do that in an efficacious way. Now, when you look at Singapore and Mauritius, they're not that different. Singapore's a little farther down the process. There's more people over 65. But these pyramid curves look pretty much the same. Mauritius has an aging issue that's rapidly developing. And so the question is, what can be done in Mauritius to really facilitate healthy longevity? How can it help its population? How can it develop business? And we'll be talking about that later, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I just want to end by saying there's a lot of different possibilities here. But I think it has to start with population health. And this is really about democratization. It's fine to have clinics doing expensive things, and if they work, that's great. Maybe we can scale them and make them cheaper. But ultimately, we need a strategy where we can really help everyone in the population so that everyone has accessibility to a longer health span. And that's one of the things. Everything we do academically in Singapore is based on low-cost interventions and relatively low-cost measurements of aging that can be scaled rapidly. Longevity clinics are certainly a possibility here. I already mentioned that. Consumer businesses are now talking a lot about healthy longevity and aging populations in their consumer marketing approaches. And I think this is really an opportunity for innovation, because really, there's no country that's fully grasped the importance of geroscience and healthy longevity yet. I think Singapore is getting close. I think many countries like the US are so befuddled right now that they aren't capable of developing a really progressive approach to this. So this is an opportunity for countries like Singapore, like Saudi Arabia, to get in front of this and be leaders in the next most important step in healthy longevity. And it's also an opportunity for other places to enter the game, like Mauritius. So I'm happy to help with that in any way possible, and I want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions. I think I'm even a minute early, so thank you.
Brian set me on this path over 10 or 12 years ago. So I have a lot that I owe to Brian. One of the questions that came in, I think there's going to be some questions around what approaches the entire country could take, but one individual wrote, what are some potential, while things are being explored and developed, what are some potential basic lifestyle interventions that are available to people today?
Well, I think that this is not an all or none process, healthy longevity. It's incremental. If you can get people taking small steps toward a healthier lifestyle, exercising more and better, eating better. A large percentage of this population has diabetes. That's an accelerant for aging for sure. Improving sleep quality, easier said than done, but important. All of these, and managing stress, all of these things, if you can make incremental steps with the population or with individuals, they will improve their health. So you don't have to wait for stem cells and drugs. Those may be great as they get developed, but there are already things that can be done. And I think it is personalized. The best exercise for me may not be the best exercise for you. There's a lot of overlapping things that are general, and I think it's a deep discussion. But getting people educated and engaged in lifestyle is a great first start.
Fantastic. I guess one of the questions that came up is, can you share an example of how local or regional policies have been implemented or in the country, in Singapore, and that have translated to positive outcomes?
So I think they're really in the process of implementing geroscience now. That we'll see how that goes. But there have been a lot of other initiatives that have happened in Singapore, like Healthier SG, which gives people apps and encourages them to be more active and take more steps. And then there's a reward mechanism if they do that. There are a lot of community-based centers that have gyms and people that are trained in them that can work with people over 65 to improve their exercise. So there are a lot of sort of lifestyle things that have been developed so far, and I think now they're entering the realm of, geroscience in terms of drugs and supplements and other types of interventions.
That's fantastic. Maybe two questions combined into one. Okay. I'm laughing to see the Brian Johnson question.
Yeah. My favorite question.
You're going to be talking about aging clocks tomorrow, but when we talk about maybe biomarkers, how can people today who are not Brian Johnson approach what biomarkers are important, what kind of conversations they should be having with their medical providers, and what are your thoughts about Brian Johnson and that end of the spectrum?
Yeah, there are a whole range of biomarkers out there, and let's remember there are a whole range of preclinical markers for disease progression that overlap with biomarkers of aging, glucose, blood pressure. Everybody should be doing their basic medical prevention, seeing their general doctors, getting these things measured, catching things as early as possible, and intervening to prevent disease progression. And one of the things I'll argue tomorrow is that if you intervene with a beta blocker or a metformin or something, you not only prevent that trajectory down that one disease, but you keep the whole network functioning better and preserve health longer. So earlier intervention is the key. I think when it comes to Brian Johnson, first of all, I am supportive of hackers. I think if people want to educate themselves and adopt whatever sort of longevity styles for their own body that they want to do, that should be their choice. We need to empower people to make their own health decisions. However, I think that there's not enough science behind his protocol. One of the key challenges, and I met him, by the way, he's very nice to me. He came up to me and he said, "You're that doctor that says bad things about me." And I said, "Well, I'm not the only one, So, but I think that the problem, I'll give you one problem. I don't want to take too much time. There might be a number of supplements and drugs that work to slow aging, but you can't just stack them all together and expect that 20 different things is going to give you 20 times the effect. A lot of these interventions impact the same pathway, and you can hit that pathway too hard and have negative effects. And I'd liken it to the fact that if you mix 20 colors of paint together, you're going to get some ugly brown color of paint out in the end. We don't know how to combine interventions, and we don't know which ones work in which people. And so the idea of just stacking everything together, I think, is a dangerous strategy right now. So I'm okay with him doing it for his body, but he's marketing that now, and I just want people to, I don't care if they market things and make money, but there should be good science behind it, and I don't think that's there yet.
I agree. One last question, and just wondering, you mentioned personalized medicine and maybe precision medicine in a way, but speak a little bit to just the variability between like you and I. How would we be different, and why is that important, and how does that affect your thinking about taking care of yourself?
I think from an interventional standpoint, there's probably no intervention that works in 100% of the population. Even exercise. Sure, some form of exercise may benefit almost everybody, but it's different levels. Maybe running a marathon is good for you, but if I do it, it's too much for me. So I think that we need to understand what the individual can deal with. And that's why I think we sort of need iterative biomarkers so we can measure over time what's happening with different interventions to aging clocks and other kinds of aging markers, and then try to optimize the individual. And that's something I'll talk about more tomorrow.
Fantastic. Brian, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely.